Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. The year 1914 presented Sir Ernest Shackleton with an opportunity that would go down in history. A grand expedition to the south of Antarctica would not only make his name immortal, but also inspire one of the most epic survival stories in human history. Shackleton, known as a great explorer of the British Empire, saw this journey as the pinnacle of his exploratory endeavors. He had grand visions for the future, yet no one at the time could have predicted how this voyage would turn into a nightmare. Shackleton had been part of Antarctic explorations between 1901 and 1904, and was eager to learn more than what had already been discovered. A new expedition could place him at the top of the world of exploration. However, this journey would not only test his physical endurance, but also force him to confront the harshest climatic conditions on Earth. His ultimate goal was to reach the unexplored regions of Antarctica and cross the continent. This was the culmination of years of planning and preparation. The preparations for the journey were extensive. Shackleton carefully selected the most reliable and capable crew members and chose the ship Endurance for this mission. The ship was built using modern shipbuilding techniques, yet its resilience against the brutal conditions of Antarctica remained uncertain. It was designed for a tough battle, but no one could have imagined the kind of struggle that lay ahead. When Shackleton and his 27-member crew departed from London, the entire British Empire watched in anticipation. They were about to set foot in one of the most unforgiving environments on the planet, facing polar cold, raging storms, ice fields, and unknown dangers. Before the journey began, Shackleton's words to his crew still echoed in their minds. "Nothing compares to the determination you show in achieving your goal." Yet those words would soon serve as a reminder of the incredible hardships they were about to endure. On December 8, 1914, Endurance set sail from the port of Ushuaia, Argentina. The journey to Antarctica was expected to be dangerous and challenging, but the crew trusted Shackleton and followed him with unwavering faith. As the ship ventured further into the vast ocean, some of the crew were filled with excitement, while others sensed the peril ahead. With its brave crew aboard, Endurance pressed forward into the unknown, each man stepping toward an uncertain fate. For the first few weeks, the journey felt like an ordinary sea voyage. However, as they approached the pole, the weather began to change rapidly. The ocean's temperature dropped, the skies darkened, and the winds intensified, clear warnings of the dangers to come. Shackleton, as a leader, constantly reassured his men, reminding them of the importance of reaching their destination. Unfortunately, these challenges were merely the beginning. By January 1915, as Endurance neared the Antarctic coast, the crew encountered a formidable new obstacle: massive ice floes. These frozen behemoths, nearly motionless on the water's surface, made navigation impossible. Shackleton's plan was to move northward and find an open passage, but the ice proved too powerful. The ship became trapped, unable to move forward. For days they fought to break free, but the relentless pressure of the ice caused the ship's hull to creak and groan under immense strain. As Endurance remained stuck in the freezing grip of Antarctica, Shackleton displayed remarkable leadership to keep his team together. With the ship unable to progress, Shackleton and his men were forced to disembark onto the ice. Each passing day made conditions increasingly dire, and continuing the journey as planned became an impossibility. The ship's entrapment was a harbinger of an even harsher battle for survival. Unexpectedly, Endurance was now imprisoned in the frozen wastelands of the Antarctic, yet Shackleton and his men would soon begin their struggle to survive. Their fight for life would take place in the cold, dark, and unforgiving expanse of the ice, where only their trust in each other and their determination would keep them alive. As Shackleton and his crew ventured deeper into Antarctica in early 1915 aboard Endurance, they encountered challenges they had never anticipated. Every step forward was met with worsening polar conditions and the looming threat of immense ice fields, turning their voyage into an unparalleled fight against nature itself. The journey that began on December 8, 1914, was initially filled with excitement and hope. However, after just a few weeks, everything started to change. This grand expedition was not only a scientific endeavor, but also a battle against the unforgiving forces of nature, which seemed to resist human determination at every step. At first, Endurance sailed through the cold seas and under the dark skies, making its way toward the polar region. The crew believed that under Shackleton's leadership they could overcome any hardship. However, as 1915 arrived, the ice, an ominous harbinger of disaster, began to close in on the ship. At first, small ice floes and drifting ice chunks appeared, but soon massive glaciers blocked Endurance's path. Becoming trapped in ice was a nightmare for any sailor. Though the crew had experience overcoming such obstacles, the sheer scale and power of the ice made it unclear what could be done. Instead of moving forward, the ship was slowing down with each passing day. The surrounding ice grew thicker and more treacherous, gradually narrowing Endurance's route. Captain Shackleton gathered his most skilled engineers and technicians to find a solution, but the situation quickly became dire. On January 21, 1915, Endurance came to a complete stop, frozen solid in the Antarctic ice. Despite the crew's initial ice predictions and strategic planning, the situation was spiraling out of control. Endurance was trapped as if a massive ice plug had sealed it in place. The ship's ropes strained against the pressure of the encroaching ice, and the crew desperately searched for ways to free it. However, the most terrifying aspect of their predicament was not just their inability to move forward. It was the realization that their survival depended on extremely limited resources in a frozen wasteland. As days passed, Shackleton and his team worked tirelessly to save the ship while simultaneously preparing for survival. With Endurance locked in ice, there was no way to access fresh supplies from the sea, nor was there any hope of outside assistance. The cold was relentless, draining the crew's energy with every step they took. As a leader, Shackleton did everything he could to keep morale high, ensuring his men remained focused on the challenge at hand. The crew ventured outside the ship multiple times each day to examine the ice, searching for any sign of movement, but all their efforts proved futile. Every attempt to free the ship ended in disappointment and frustration. The ice was not only crushing the vessel, it was also slowly suffocating their hope. One day, Shackleton gathered his crew and made a crucial decision about the future of Endurance. The ship could no longer be saved. Recognizing this harsh reality, Shackleton announced a new plan. They had to abandon the ship and fight for survival on foot. It was a brutal decision, as leaving the ship meant losing a significant portion of their supplies. Yet Shackleton's men trusted him, and they were willing to do whatever it took to survive. Leaving Endurance was an emotional and painful moment for the crew. After years of meticulous planning and a treacherous journey, the ship had been their lifeline, yet now they had no choice but to abandon it. The ice surrounding Endurance served as a cruel reminder of the merciless nature of their survival ordeal. Each step away from the ship was filled with both the determination to survive and the sorrow of what they were leaving behind. Now, Endurance was little more than a frozen relic, motionless in an icy labyrinth. Shackleton and his men set off toward a new goal, but it was clear that their journey would be long and arduous. As the ship lay trapped in the icy darkness of Antarctica, Shackleton's leadership faced its ultimate test. His crew would have to push themselves to their limits to reach land, knowing that this was only the beginning of a survival battle that would change their lives forever. With Endurance trapped in ice, Shackleton and his team's struggle for survival had just begun. After abandoning the ship, they had to find a way to endure the merciless Antarctic conditions, which only became harsher with each passing day. Returning to the ship was no longer an option, and Shackleton's men braced themselves for the brutal winter ahead. Snow, ice, and cold had become their greatest enemies. Yet, there was something just as powerful: their trust in one another and the unwavering determination of their leader. By February 1915, the area surrounding Endurance, now trapped in the ice, had fallen into an eerie silence for Shackleton and his crew. Only the howling wind and the occasional cracking of the ice could be heard. In this dark and frigid environment, every step taken to survive became an even greater challenge. After abandoning the ship, Shackleton's top priority was to keep his men's morale high and ensure their physical survival. With 27 crew members depending on him, they would explore every possible solution to stay alive. Clothing was undoubtedly one of the most critical elements for survival in these conditions. The cold was so extreme that staying outside for even an hour would have been impossible under normal circumstances. Aware of this, Shackleton instructed his crew to dress in layers and to keep their clothing dry at all costs. Many crew members relied on furs and animal hides to add extra insulation. Numerous attempts were made to find the best solutions, but staying warm in the icy wilderness was just as difficult as avoiding getting lost in the darkness. The crew did everything they could to maintain their clothing, repeatedly wearing the same garments and repairing them as they became worn and tattered. Another major challenge the team faced was securing enough food. While the provisions aboard the ship were sufficient for a while, they began to dwindle over time, highlighting just how critical their survival struggle had become. Every day, the crew carefully rationed their food and reviewed their remaining supplies one last time. In this frozen environment, they were not only fighting for their own survival but also competing with the wildlife. Hunting and gathering food in Antarctica's icy wastelands was incredibly difficult. Resources were scarce, and with each passing day, their resilience was tested even further. Beyond the physical struggle, the crew's psychological limits were also being pushed to their extremes. Trapped in the ice with no way forward, time seemed to blur. The harsh cold, darkness, and isolation placed an enormous strain on their morale. Survival was not just a physical endeavor. It required immense mental strength. The sun remained, hidden for days, and the world beneath the ice felt like a never-ending nightmare. Shackleton not only searched for ways to keep his crew alive, but also took on the role of safeguarding their mental well-being. To combat despair, he organized regular morale meetings and encouraged his men daily. He understood that dwindling food supplies weren't the only concern. Maintaining hope was just as crucial. Shackleton made sure that every crew member felt valued and emphasized the importance of unity and solidarity. Rather than focusing solely on their struggles, he helped them find reasons to keep going. Shackleton was not just a leader. He became a psychological guide for his men. Whenever he noticed signs of distress or unease, he personally spoke with the crew member, offering reassurance and motivation. Even though new dangers lurked among the ice at all times, Shackleton knew that survival depended on his team feeling strong and capable. Building shelters was another key factor in their survival. Shackleton and his crew began preparing for the long winter ahead, making use of the very ice that had trapped them. At first, the ice seemed like a hostile force, but it also provided materials for constructing shelters. The crew worked tirelessly to create a suitable space to store their food and supplies. They experimented with various techniques, eventually building makeshift shelters from snow and ice to shield themselves from the harsh weather. Once the crew moved into their newly built shelters, they had to be extremely cautious. The structures were designed to block the freezing winds and retain body heat. However, they were not always secure. Several times, violent snowstorms and strong winds forced them to rebuild their shelters over and over again. With each challenge, their determination and courage were tested even further. Survival in this frozen world was a battle against nature itself, but through resilience, unity, and Shackleton's leadership, they continued to fight against all odds, and Shackleton and his crew, in solidarity, not only rationed their food throughout the winter, but also continued to stay physically and mentally strong. Surviving under such harsh conditions taught them both their own limits and the power of unity. This was not just a physical battle. It was a psychological war that constantly required them to stoke the fire of hope and the will to survive. Along with their ship, lost in the ice, the world would soon witness their fight for survival. The endurance being stuck in the thick ice of Antarctica was not only a physical obstacle but also a painful symbol of the end of the exploration journey they had once hoped for. The ship, trapped in the ice, was Shackleton's first major loss in his battle for survival. However, this loss did not give him a chance to quit. As a leader, his duty was to keep the entire crew alive and to find a way out without leading them into despair. The inability to free the ship pushed Shackleton to devise a new, bolder plan, a risky escape journey through polar conditions to find their lost bearings. Shackleton observed that as days passed since abandoning the Endurance, the crew's morale continued to drop. Trapped in a frozen environment far from the continent, he decided to create a new plan to save his 27 men from this desperate situation. However, this plan would be physically and psychologically even more grueling. Shackleton and the crew first decided to abandon the ship, which had become completely immobile, and head out to open waters. But there was one problem. Even taking a step forward seemed impossible. After the ship became firmly lodged in a massive block of ice, Shackleton concluded that their only option for survival was to venture out into the sea. The ship was entirely stuck, so they needed to find a new route forward. This would not only be a physical journey but also a mental decision-making process. Shackleton emphasized to his crew that the struggle for survival must continue, and they needed to make the best use of their remaining chances. This plan required the crew to ration their remaining food and supplies carefully. Plotting a new route meant heading into an unknown polar region. All eyes were on Shackleton, waiting to see what strategy he would develop. While Shackleton and a few men decided to undertake a dangerous journey to find their lost direction, the rest of the crew had to wait, focusing not just on survival, but on creating a real chance of escape. This would be the result of the few men who would take the risk. Shackleton, hoping to find a better route across the sea, took a few men with him and set out in a small boat into the heart of the frozen sea. This boat became the symbol of hope for the survival of the entire crew. However, the journey turned dangerous right from the start. In polar conditions, this trip revealed a new dimension to the struggle for survival. In hindsight, Shackleton's decision marked a moment where a leader dedicated himself to his team's fate and unexpectedly created a glimmer of hope for rescue. Shackleton and his men set off with the limited materials and food they had taken from Endurance. However, in the ruthless nature of the polar region, each step they took brought them closer to death. Their journey through the ice floes involved days of fierce storms, sub-zero temperatures, freezing winds, and occasional disorientation. They had to contend not only with the icy seas, but also with the harsh environment. The extreme cold, wind, and the slowly depleting fresh water and food put the team in constant danger. Shackleton tried to keep the spirits of everyone in the boat balanced. The survival of the entire crew depended on him. They tried to make small fires for warmth inside the boat, but these efforts would not be successful for long. In polar conditions, staying outside for just a few hours greatly jeopardized physical health. Every man had to push his body to its limits to survive. Shackleton gave them encouragement at every opportunity, helping them believe that together they could survive. Shackleton and his team spent days navigating through the polar region in the boat, trying to discover new land masses. However, not everything was going smoothly. The ice continually trapped the boat, making it almost impossible for the crew to progress. They advanced in the hope of finding land, but each time, their hopes were dashed. With each passing day, the struggle against the cold and depleting resources became even more difficult. The boat had become too overloaded to move forward. During their journey through the polar region, Shackleton and a few of his men were pushed into an extremely destructive situation. They were not only under the pressure of nature, but also the psychological strain was taking its toll. Surviving required immense inner strength and trust in each other. However, finding their lost bearings and discovering the correct route to salvation became more and more difficult with each passing day. Every step they took seemed to freeze them further and push them farther away from their goal. Yet Shackleton remained a leader who did not lose hope. He believed that even under these polar conditions they would find a way to escape. Finally, Shackleton and his men approached a landmass. This was a critical moment for the crew's survival. As the weight of their survival gear grew heavier, on their backs the land was becoming a beacon of hope. However, the significance of this moment tested not only the strength of Shackleton and the crew's struggle for survival, but also the limits of human willpower. Shackleton and his crew endured some of the most difficult tests of their physical and psychological endurance during the months they spent in Antarctica's icy seas. Although they had survived the endurance, their fight for survival from the very beginning grew increasingly hopeless. After the ship was trapped in the ice, Shackleton and the crew aimed to reach land masses by navigating the polar seas with small boats, but nature threw new challenges at them with every step. The cold, hunger, dwindling supplies, and constantly changing weather conditions made the crew more and more fragile with each passing day. Shackleton managed to overcome every psychological and physical barrier to keep his crew alive. As a leader, he was skilled at encouraging and motivating them. Every day, under the biting cold winds and sharp ice storms, Shackleton worked to keep the morale of the crew high. However, there was only so much a leader could do. Taking one more step each day, keeping the hope of survival alive just a little longer, was testing the crew's strength. People's mental health deteriorated, and their bodies slowly began to wear out. At one point, Shackleton's determination was the only source of motivation. Many of the crew members were growing increasingly desperate. They were slowly losing their fighting spirit and began questioning what life had in store for them. The snow, ice, cold, and never-ending storms were pushing them to their limits. Shackleton spent both day and night speaking to the crew, calming them, offering words of hope, and encouraging each of them to collaborate and survive. Reviving hope, in their eyes, was not just a physical victory, but also a spiritual one. Shackleton's leadership was not only limited to strategic decisions. Every moment he too felt exhausted but tried to remain strong in front of his crew to avoid losing morale. He often told them, "Our trust in each other is enough to keep us standing in this ice. We will succeed. These hard days will pass." However, as time passed, even human willpower had its limits. In an environment consisting of nothing but storms, snow, and ice, Shackleton and his crew were becoming less hopeful of finding a way out with each passing day. One of the greatest obstacles Shackleton and his crew faced was Antarctica's severe weather conditions. Sub-zero temperatures, freezing winds, and snowstorms pushed each crew member to the brink of survival. The storms were so powerful that the boats struggled to make progress through the frozen sea. At times, the boats became stuck in the ice, and Shackleton and his men took greater risks with each attempt to cross the ice and reach land. Each storm had a devastating impact on the crew's morale. The freezing temperatures brought on by the storms seriously threatened their body temperature, and acquiring water and food to survive became nearly impossible. The effort each member had to exert just to stay alive was pushing them physically to exhaustion. Shackleton and his crew continued to move forward, seemingly lost in the snow and ice, but every step became more dangerous. Looking back, nothing could protect them. In these harsh conditions, each individual had to rely solely on their own strength to survive. At one point, Shackleton decided to take the survival struggle a step further. He and a few of his men planned a dangerous journey to reach another ship in order to get help. This decision reignited the hope of everyone who had survived. Shackleton and his crew, while carrying the hope that this journey would bring them, helped to save their lives, also strengthened their trust in each other with every step. Shackleton decided to take a huge risk in the polar seas to reach a ship and get help. They set off in small boats, progressing with great caution. However, during their journey, nature once again showed its harsh side. Violent storms, snow, and freezing temperatures made every step even more difficult. However, Shackleton's leadership and his trust in the crew gave them a sense of purpose and meaning again. Reaching a ship that could provide help was not just a dream for them, but the last ray of hope for survival. Shackleton and his men spent some time navigating through the dark seas. Every minute for them was another battle for survival. Dwindling food and water supplies were putting them in a tough spot. Yet Shackleton's determination succeeded in keeping the crew motivated without letting them lose hope. The ship they were aiming to reach for help was their last chance for survival. However, this was just a glimmer of hope. The polar conditions could turn this struggle into a new danger at any moment, and even if they reached the ship, they might not have enough time to survive. Shackleton and his men put everything on the line in this journey to survive. Storms, freezing temperatures, violent winds, and depleting resources slowly wore them down. But Shackleton's leadership and the crew's trust in each other kept giving them hope. This was not just an ordinary journey. Every step was an attempt at salvation. But this journey had a much deeper meaning. Human will, even against nature, can risk everything to never lose hope. Shackleton showing his crew what it meant to never give up, and how they could survive with one last effort was the only thing keeping them alive. This journey was a real struggle for salvation, shaped by determination, faith, and leadership. During the years spent in Antarctica's freezing cold and ice-covered seas, Shackleton and his crew had fought not only against nature, but also a great internal battle. Not only surviving, but also keeping their trust in each other intact, and emerging from this disaster seemed like an impossible obstacle with every step. However, Shackleton's leadership and the crew's will to survive had kept them alive with incredible resilience. This story, witnessed by the entire world, would eventually be written into history in golden letters because it was not just a survival battle for an exploratory expedition, but a journey that tested the very limits of the human spirit and willpower. Shackleton continued to make one final effort to keep his crew's hope for survival alive. After years of struggle, the long-awaited moment had finally arrived. He had managed to establish contact with another ship, and it was certain that they would set out to get help. This help was not just a rescue, it was also a victory for Shackleton's leadership. Looking back, while part of the crew still had doubts, Shackleton's leadership and the ways he always found to survive had kept them alive. The crew, once again renewing their trust in Shackleton, held on to a new hope. The presence of the rescue ship was a turning point for the entire crew. They had reached the end of their battle for survival, and a great ray of hope had appeared. However, this journey had been extremely difficult. Shackleton, encouraging the crew on this final rescue journey, tried to strengthen their bonds and faith in each other. Every step was like a lesson reminding them of the value of survival. They had undergone not only a physical journey, but also a spiritual one. As they got closer to their goal, Shackleton and the crew's trust in each other was stronger than ever. As Shackleton and his crew finally saw the rescue ship in the distance, they found themselves facing another great obstacle. Storms, freezing temperatures, and dwindling food stocks tested them one last time. But Shackleton's leadership and determination helped them overcome this final challenge. While fighting to find the course of the rescue ship, every step became another victory, showcasing the value of survival. Shackleton and a few of his men managed to embark on one last great journey. This moment not only allowed them to find the path to salvation that would enable them to survive, but it was also a moment when their trust in each other was fully solidified. Each crew member, with one final effort, helped Shackleton on this journey. It was no longer just about saving the ship, but about survival. This journey had transformed into a cry for survival, where their faith in each other merged with their trust in Shackleton's leadership. After many hardships, the ship finally appeared. Despite the storms and polar conditions, Shackleton and his crew managed to reach the ship that would provide them with help. This moment was a victory for the entire crew, as they had finally managed to survive despite all the challenges. The year 1917 became a symbol of salvation for Shackleton and his crew after years of survival struggle. The difficulties they had faced since the Endurance was trapped in the ice, the storms, hunger, and dwindling supplies had brought them to the brink of death. However, in the end, Shackleton and his crew successfully made their way back. The moment the ship managed to get help was not only a rescue but also a triumph of human determination and faith that tested the limits of what one could endure. Shackleton's leadership had been the cornerstone of his crew's survival struggle. While the failure of the expedition went down in history, Shackleton and his crew's survival was a great victory. In 1917, Shackleton and his crew returned as the heroes of one of the most challenging and extraordinary survival stories in history. This survival journey, led by Shackleton, was not just a geographical exploration but also an adventure that pushed the deepest boundaries of the human spirit. This tragic expedition in Antarctica became a symbol of Shackleton's leadership skills and the resilience of his crew. Shackleton, who never gave up during the struggle for survival, ultimately succeeded in etching his name in history with golden letters. Shackleton's leadership was not only about strategy and planning, he also managed to keep his crew united, even in the most hopeless situations, ensuring their survival like a family. Although the expedition failed, Shackleton and his crew's ability to survive this journey became a lesson in what human determination, courage, and leadership can achieve. This journey was not just remembered as a survival story, but as a heroic tale of the victory of human will.